StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories, where biblical stories of the ages come alive.
In our last story, Jesus cured a blind man. The Lord continued his comment to the Pharisees by saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a sheepfold, which is a place where sheep are gathered together at night. He that does not go through the door into the sheepfold, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. He that goes in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. I am the door. If any man goes into the sheepfold through me, he is safe in the fold." Continuing with our series on the life of Christ, this story from the Bible is titled, The Good Shepard.
Precious memories.
StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories with your host, Dr. Joe Jackson. Stories directly from God's holy word, told in easy-to-understand story form that the whole family will enjoy, and featuring the work of a talented artist illustrating each week's story. Now gather the family because it's time for this week's Bible story.
The Pharisees didn't seem to understand what Jesus meant, and so the Lord explained it to them. Heaven is the sheepfold. The people are the sheep. The Christ is the door. All who want to go to heaven must go through the door. This they can do by believing the Christ and obeying him. Those men who teach any other way of going to heaven are thieves and robbers because they're taking from the people the best things of life. Jesus told them another parable to show them that his greatest wish was to do them good. In this parable, he called himself the shepherd of the sheep, and other teachers hired men who didn't care for the sheep because they didn't own them. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd is willing to give his life for the sheep. But the one who's hired to take care of the sheep, who doesn't own them, cares nothing for them. If he sees a wolf coming, he leaves the sheep and runs to look out for himself, and then the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. I am the good shepherd, and I will give my life for the sheep." How sweet and loving the voice of Jesus must have been. Many of the people believed that Jesus was telling the truth. Many thought that they'd like to belong to the Good Shepherd and go to heaven through this door. But some said, "He's insane. Why do you listen to him?" And those who were ready to believe Jesus said, "But what he says doesn't sound like the talk of an insane man. Can anyone who's insane give sight to a man who's always been blind?" And they almost began to quarrel among themselves. Very soon after he had spoken these words, it was time for another of the feasts of the children of Israel. This one was called the Feast of the Dedication. Like the other special feasts we've read about, this one lasted a week. It was held in the wintertime. As Jesus walked into the temple one day, some of the children of Israel came around him and asked, "How long shall we have to wait without knowing whether you're the Christ or not? If you are the Christ, tell us so plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you so many times, but you wouldn't believe me. The miracles that I do ought to answer your questions, but you won't believe me because you're not my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them the life that will last forever. My Father who gave them to me is greater than all else, and no one shall be able to take them away from my Father or me. For I and my Father are one." Then those children of Israel took up stones to throw at him. What did he do in response? Did he speak to them in anger? No. He gently said, I've done many good deeds for you through my Father. For which one of these are you now stoning me? You'd think these words of Jesus would have made them want to drop their stones in shame, asking the Lord to forgive them. Is that what happened? No. They replied to Jesus, it's not for good works that we stone you, but because you, a man, call yourself God. Jesus said, if I don't do the works of God, then don't believe me. But if I do, then believe the works that you see, even if you can't believe me. And then you will know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. Again, the Sanhedrin tried to arrest the man who called himself the Son of God, but they just couldn't do it. Jesus left the temple and crossed the Jordan over into the country where John the Baptist used to preach. Many of the people followed him, saying, he's greater than John, because John did no miracle. Everything that John said about this man is true, and many believed Jesus. These new friends asked Jesus to teach them a prayer, as John had taught his disciples. And Jesus then taught them the same prayer that he had taught the disciples back in Galilee, what we call the Lord's Prayer. He told them not to give up praying because God didn't seem to answer them right away. He told them that the Father loved to have them keep asking and would give them what was best for them, just as they were willing to give good things to their own children. The people in this part of the country crowded around Jesus just as the people of Galilee had the year before. Think about how you might have felt if you'd been there with this crowd listening to Jesus. So many people could not hear Jesus speak just once. After hearing the Savior, many of them wanted to hear him again and again. Some probably believed that Jesus was indeed the Son of God, but no doubt others heard him talk and forgot him. As Jesus was teaching the people one day, a Pharisee asked him to dinner. Why he invited Jesus, we don't know. Perhaps he liked to hear him and wanted to know him better. But probably he wanted to draw Jesus away from the people in the hope of getting him to say something that could be taken to the rulers and complained about. Whatever his reason, Jesus went with him. He sat down at the table and began to eat. You remember the custom the Pharisees had of washing their hands before they ate and why they did it? Well, on this occasion, Jesus didn't wash his hands as he sat down to this dinner, and the Pharisee found fault with him. But Jesus wanted to teach the people that these customs were not of much importance. He wanted them to learn to obey the real commands of God. It was much more necessary to be honest and kind and loving than to wash one's hands just because it was a custom. So when the Pharisee found fault with him, Jesus told the Pharisee and the others who were there with him at the table what he thought about these things. They didn't like what he said, and they tried to say things that would make him angry, hoping that he might say more than he meant to. But the Pharisees and the others didn't succeed in this, and Jesus went away from them and afterward told his friends not to trust the Pharisees, for they were hypocrites. Hypocrites are those who say one thing when they mean something else. Sometimes we refer to them as two-faced. But Jesus said, do not be afraid of them, even if they arrest you and try to kill you. God, who takes care of even the sparrows, which are worth so little, will surely take care of you. Yet, even though they should kill you, it's only your body that they hurt, for they can't touch your soul. And the soul is that part of you which is to live forever. Two brothers who lived in that part of the country had quarreled about some money that had been left to them. One of the brothers took more than the other thought was right. One day, while Jesus was talking to a very large crowd of people, the brother who didn't think he had gotten his share said to Jesus, Master, speak to my brother and tell him to divide the money with me. Jesus answered him, who made me your judge or gave me the right to divide your property for you? That wasn't what Jesus had come to earth to do. He had come to earth to teach. The people had heard what was said to Jesus about property, so while they were thinking about property, Jesus taught them a lesson. He said, do not long to own what you see other people have, for a man's happiness doesn't depend on what he owns. And then he told them this story. There was once a rich man who owned a great piece of land, and he planted the land. Everything grew well for the entire year, and at harvest time, there was so much to gather in that the man didn't have room enough to store all of it. So he thought to himself, what am I going to do? My barns are too small. Where shall I put all that has grown this year? Well, he could have given some of it away, don't you think? But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to keep all of it for himself, so he said to himself, I'll pull down my barns and I'll build bigger ones, which will be large enough to hold all that I have gathered. And then I'll say to my soul, soul, you have enough for many years. Take your comfort now, and eat and drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you foolish man, you will die this very night, and then who will have those things that you have stored away? Jesus then said, so is everyone who is rich in money and other treasures, but is not rich in God's love. After finishing this story, Jesus taught his disciples many things that he had taught the people of Galilee in the Sermon on the Mount. He told them not to be too anxious about their food and clothing, for God, who cared for such little things as birds and flowers, would surely care for them. And he said, let your greatest wish be to live as one of God's children ought to live, and all these things will be given to you. Do your best every day, and then whenever God calls you to live with him, you'll be ready to go. Jesus was teaching in the synagogue one Sabbath day, and among the worshipers there was a woman who was very deformed. For 18 years, her back had been bent over like a bow. Nothing on earth could make her back straight. The loving heart of Jesus felt pity for the poor woman. He called her to him, and laying his hands on her, he said, you are now free from this trouble. No sooner had he said this than the woman felt a difference in her back and found that she could stand straight again. She was no longer deformed. It made her very happy, as you can imagine, and she thanked God for what had been done. But the ruler of the synagogue was very angry that this had been done on the Sabbath. So he said to the people, There are 6 days in the week in which men ought to work. Come on one of those days if you want to be cured. Jesus turned to this man and said, "You hypocrite! Doesn't each one on the Sabbath untie his ox and lead him away to water? If there's such need of doing this that it's not wrong to do it on the Sabbath, should not this woman be freed from the trouble she's had for 18 years, even if on the Sabbath day?" These words made the Pharisees ashamed of themselves, and the people shouted for joy because of the glorious things that were being done.
Precious memories, unseen angels, sent from somewhere to my soul.